You wrote a book titled Arguments, co-wrote a book titled Arguments Against G8. Before we move on to the negative effects of the G8 and their agenda, there's often remarks that it's an inefficient body. Now, regardless of whether they are putting forth positive or negative agenda, do you also find them to be an inefficient body?
No, I think they're quite efficient. There are issues about the way in which the process works, and the Sherpas, who are the ones who take forward the business, and how that operates. But it's quite an efficient body, given the different interests they have to referee between. Basically, the idea of the G8 is for the 8 most powerful nations on Earth, not the 8 biggest economies, mind, but the 8 most powerful nations on Earth, to organise policies of common interest. So it's really a means for them to work out on which policies they can work together. And at that level it's quite efficient, because it allows them then to have a certain level of legitimacy within their own vision of the world. Of course, they have no legitimacy outside of that, because the G8 itself is not elected. But it allows them to try and find a way of working in common with the other powerful nations to impose their view and their policies on the world. Of course, it's not always possible to come to common agreements, and that's where some of this notion of inefficiency comes from, because there are countries and nations who are not willing to work collaboratively on some issues, and the obvious examples of that in the last 3 to 4 years has been the US in relation to climate, because of course the US has the largest proportion of the companies causing the pollution and gains the most from the pollution which causes climate change. So the US is less likely to want to make serious actions and policies on that. So it doesn't work in all occasions, but mostly it works to forge a common agenda for the rich countries to pursue the policies that they want to pursue, and to impose those on the rest of us.
And could you please describe these policies and which of them you find most negative for the people and the planet?
I mean, the people on the planet is the two key elements here. On the one hand, the umbrella under which all of these operate is the umbrella of neoliberalism, which means essentially that everything must be treated as a market, and the market must be assumed to work efficiently in the interests of all. And of course, all of us know, who've had any experience with the market, that the market doesn't work by itself to bring benefits to all. The market works consistently to bring benefits to those who are already rich and already powerful, and to increase the power that they have, occasionally to allow new entrants into the club. Witness the arrival of Russia and the attempted arrival of China, of India, and of Brazil. So the idea of the G8 is really to try and work together to impose neoliberalism through the other bodies which work together with it. So, for example, the World Trade Organization and the IMF and the World Bank on the one hand, and on the other hand, the policy planning groups of the leading corporations in the world, such as the World Economic Forum. So it's a means for them to forge a common agenda in relation to neoliberalism and the imposition of market rules on the whole world. So that's one element of it, and that, of course, impacts negatively on both people and planet, in the sense that it drives down wages and living standards, and it increases the gap between rich and poor on the human side, causing famine and poverty and hunger and death. And on the climate side, it stops any effective action against climate change, tries to create a kind of environmentalism which will allow the corporations to continue to extract profits from the world's resources. And of course that results in climate change with again, the same results of the impacts on the poorest in the world, and impacts actually all over the world in terms of floods, drought, and increasing climate problems. So those are the main things, that the main impacts of neoliberalism. The other element of it that I would note, though, is the question of security and foreign policy, because not everything is covered by questions of economics and of climate, because of course the other issue here is the question of U.S. power, and the U.S. power in the world is clearly one of the key threats facing humanity, and particularly the ideology and policy of perpetual war signed up to by the neoconservatives and by most in the elite of the U.S. foreign policy establishment, and also, to be fair, by most in the elite in the other G8 nations. Of course, there are some divisions between them. For example, the French and the Germans didn't like, and the Russians too, didn't like the Iraq war terribly much. They weren't opposed to it in principle, of course, but they were opposed to the war in the terms advanced by the U.S. So the other key element is the question of perpetual war and of the war on terror, the clash of civilizations, and all those ideological themes advanced by the U.S. government. And so you have that other element, which, of course, has, is this becoming familiar, has similar effects on the peoples of the world and on the environment too, in the sense that there are, we know from the scientific work that's been done on this that the war in Iraq has resulted in the deaths of 1.5 million people, in excess of the death rates in Iraq prior to the invasion. And so we know that as this policy goes on, that it will simply result in more and more deaths as the US and its allies attempt to secure control, yes, of oil markets, but also strategically of terror.